called Mrs. Zinn multiple times since the start of court this morning, left her multiple voicemails, and we're still repeating, calling her back. Whatever the court is inclined to do, we are more than willing to do. We anticipate putting on Ms. Madonna next, and that will more than likely be our only other witness. So just for the court's information on that. But the court gave the order that she was supposed to be back here at 9:30. I told her to be here at 9:30. I anticipated the state's cross would be brief and she would be fine to go at that point. But she is not in the court at this time.
Does the state object in interrupting her testimony to allow the presentation of the defendant?
I don't, Your Honor.
Are you satisfied that that would be in the best interest of your client at this point?
Your Honor, we're satisfied with that. If she comes in, we can stop Ms. Madonna briefly and then resume.
Well, if she comes in, I think she's just going to wait.
She's going to wait. Well, just for the court's information, I'm not sure how long. And I guess this is her problem, not our problem at this point. But she was running into some issues being here this afternoon, which is why I made her be here yesterday at 3 and told her we could try to wrap her up first thing this morning. So I didn't since I'm aware of that, I wanted to let you know as well. But that's her problem at this point.
But you're satisfied with proceeding?
Oh, yes, Your Honor.
We may invite the jury in. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, Judge.
We thank you for coming back and being with us today. Ms. Zinn remains bound by oath to tell the truth and is with these statements.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Zinn, originally Mr. Perez was referred to you by Dr. Falge, his general physician, because he was having difficulty coping with his health issues. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And before you even saw Mr. Perez on the 21st of January 2009, were you aware from your mental health records at the VA that the defendant had been dropped off that morning, and Mr. Perez had been dropped off that morning by the defendant, and she had stated that he was a compulsive liar and that she wanted him out of her house before he even talked to you?
No, I don't believe I was aware of that.
When he did talk to you on the 21st, his main concern wasn't his physical health issues, but that he was asking for help to stop him lying about money so that he could maintain his relationship with the defendant. Is that fair?
That's fair to say.
And in all of the times that you talked with him, did he ever exhibit any kind of suicidal ideation?
No, ma'am.
He didn't ever say that he had a desire to hurt anyone, did he?
No, he did not.
And was he ever in your presence in a state in which you believed that he was impaired by alcohol or drugs?
No, ma'am.
And can you describe Mr. Perez's physical abilities as you observed him, as far as walking and moving and his gait when you saw him?
Mr. Perez had a number of health problems. He had had heart surgery, stents. He had been in Vietnam and had been exposed to Agent Orange, had diabetes, had peripheral neuropathy because of that. So he was relatively frail, and he moved slowly, was not by any means a robust physical specimen.
And were there specific things that you saw him do in the context of your meetings with him that showed some of his problems or his difficulties in moving? For instance, was it easy for him to get into and out of a chair?
No, I mean, he was slow in moving. I believe he had been issued a cane. I don't recall whether he used that regularly.
And what you said that were your observations consistent with what you knew to be his health problems?
Yes.
And you indicated yesterday that Mr. Perez denied that he had any prior mental health issues before he started coming to see you.
That's correct.
And you had access to his medical records from Florida when he'd been going to the VA there, correct?
That's correct.
And there was nothing in his records indicating that he had sought or...
No visits with mental health providers.
Now, he freely admitted to you that he lied.
He did.
And that he was looking for help for that.
Yes.
And did his request of you for that help appear genuine?
Yes.
And on the first visit that you had with him, you made a note that he seemed clearly anxious. Was there something about his interactions with you, what he said or how he said it, that made you question about whether he had some kind of cognitive decline?
I was certainly concerned when he was talking to me about what had happened. He was rather disorganized. He was very agitated. His story didn't flow and it wasn't concise. He was kind of all over the place.
And that would have been consistent by being dumped off by his girlfriend, this defendant, and her just leaving him there.
Well, certainly if someone is emotionally upset and agitated, then they will not be very concise.
What's cognitive decline?
That is when your thinking, memory, various adaptive skills that depend on your brain show some kind of drop-off. Your functioning is not as it should be.
And is that something that could be caused by age?
Well, certainly everyone, including yours truly, has cognitive decline with age.
It also could be because of drug interactions from prescription drugs.
It could be. He had also had a liver transplant and liver problems. He had Wilson's disease, could be a factor as well.
And you also noted that his coping skills weren't very good, is that right?
That is correct.
And he maintained the entire time that he was seeing you that he had been sober for about 35 years.
Correct.
And, but he also told you that his concentration and his memory weren't very good.
True.
And sometimes that caused him to forget to take his pills.
Yes, he had mentioned that he had difficulty with that.
But he told you, despite his problems with his girlfriend, the defendant, and all of his medical issues, that he was hopeful for the future.
Yes, he was.
Did he tell you that he was afraid to lose the defendant, so to save his pride, he lied about borrowing money?
Yes, that was my impression.
And after you talked to him, you didn't find that he needed any kind of drug intervention to help him with any of his emotional issues?
Correct.
And were you aware that when you said yesterday that he had missed the next appointment that you set up for him, were you aware that he saw 2 other people at the VA in between that time and the next time that you saw him?
Yes, he had been evaluated by a psychiatrist in our emergency department.
So he didn't just disappear off the radar?
Right. He did, maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. There was, I believe, a couple of months in which he did not see anyone, but then he went to the emergency department, to the best of my recollection.
So you saw him in January,
Correct.
and were you aware he saw Candace Ford in February?
No.
February 5th, 2009. And then Sonia McRae in May of 2009.
I believe his contact with Miss McRae was a telephone call.
But he had contact with somebody
Yes, he
for
did.
mental health issues.
Yes, he did.
He didn't just disappear off the radar and quit.
No, true.
And then he came back and saw you again.
Yes.
Now, during the entire time that you talked with him in 2009 through 2010, you found him to be at a low risk for suicide, correct?
Correct.
And when you first met Mr. Perez in June of 2009, you noted that the defendant and Mr. Perez both bring considerable baggage to the relationship. Is that correct?
Correct.
That she gives mixed messages referring to the defendant,
Correct.
and that he can't figure out where he stands.
Correct.
He also indicated to you the next time that he saw you that he and the defendant had moved into a new home,
Yes.
and that she bought him a Jeep and she's happily buying furniture.
Yes.
And that he wanted to believe that she's not cheating on him at that point, but he was finding it difficult.
I believe that's what I put in my note, yes.
Now, the next, when you saw him on the 18th of November 2009, he had by that time become married to the defendant, is that correct?
I'm sorry, repeat the date?
November 18th.
Yes.
And his son was moving in with them because of his severe illnesses.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was stressful to care for the son.
Yes.
And they were buying a home together.
He had reported that, yes.
And he still told you he wasn't suicidal.
Correct.
He indicated to you that he was still sober and still going to AA.
Yes.
Did you have any reason to doubt that?
No, I did not.
He indicated to you in December of 2009 when he saw you that he had concerns about the defendant's daughters not being responsible for their, as you put it, footprint in the household. What did you mean by that?
Well, again, this is an issue with parenting where when you have children, if they don't pick up after themselves, if they don't help take care of things, then they tend to create more work for the adults.
And at that point, you were trying to get Mr. Perez to be less passive. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what were you asking him to do when you were trying to get him to be less passive with the defendant?
Well, he had concerns about some of her choices and some of the ways that she was responding to her children. And I was trying to encourage him to be appropriately assertive, to bring up his concerns, to try to get those addressed, because otherwise paint ourselves in a way that we would like to be seen.
And so would it be fair to say that when you're dealing with patients, in particular a couple, that it's often as important, if not more important, to observe their interaction together as opposed to just the words that they're saying?
Oh, very much so.
And so yesterday you said that your assessment of Mr. Perez was that he was passive, dependent, and afraid to assert himself, correct?
Correct.
And that he was a runner, and you explained that you meant by that he preferred to avoid confrontation.
True.
And that conflict made him anxious.
Yes, it did.
And that he was the kind of person who was a pleaser.
Yes, he was.
He was trying to make everybody happy.
Mm-hmm.
From talking and observing the defendant and observing her interaction between with Mr. Perez, what was your assessment of the defendant?
That's a very broad question. She clearly had emotional problems of her own. She struck me as working very hard to present a very competent, capable image, and yet it was, very likely, given what I knew of them and their situation, that there were ways in which she was floundering to cope with her own life.
Was it your assessment that she was, within the context at least of the relationship between herself and and Mr. Perez, that she was manipulative?
I think that would be fair to say.
And would it also be your assessment that in trying to present a good face or a good image that she was more likely to point the finger at somebody else rather than take the blame herself for the problems in their marriage?
That is correct.
And that you also found her to be a more aggressive person than he. Is that correct?
Yes,
And more volatile.
I would say so.
I have no other questions.
Been wrecked.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning again, Dr. Zinn.
Good morning.
Thanks for being back with us. I just have a few brief questions for you.
Okay.
Over the course of your treatment with Jose, I think you said yesterday that it was about 7 visits individually and then 2 with the group counseling. When he came individually, did he come alone, as far as you're aware?
As far as I'm aware.
So he was able to get to your office and the outpatient office in Raleigh on his own?
Typically, people would be out in the waiting room, and I would pick them up, so I don't know anything about their transportation to get there.
Do you ever recall seeing anybody else with Mr. Perez?
I don't recall.
You said over the course of your treatment that you deemed Mr. Perez to be at low risk for suicide. In your experience, have you ever found situations where individuals use suicide or the threat of suicide as kind of a controlling, manipulative thing on their spouse, even though they might not have any intent to actually carry it out.
Certainly I've seen that.
And you said that Mr. Perez was hopeful for the future, but when Ms. Madonna came in for those 2 sessions, she also agreed to do things to better the relationship, correct?
That is correct.
They both agreed to continue to remain dating
Correct.
and try to work on their issues, and ultimately they still got married.
Correct.
And your last treatment with Mr. Perez was June the 1st of 2010.
Yes, ma'am.
And you said throughout the course of the treatment, one of the things you worked on was him becoming more assertive. But obviously, you don't know how he progressed with that because your last treatment date for him was June 1st, 2010.
Correct.
I believe your language just now in speaking with Ms. Shambles was that Ms. Madonna was floundering to cope with her own life.
Yes.
And the issues she had going on. Is it fair to say she probably needed her own individual therapy, in your opinion?
Yes.
The primary reason that they were seeing you, though, is because Jose went there to seek treatment for himself, correct?
Correct.
And he was primarily there to deal with his issues as they related to him, correct?
Correct.
He thought at some point it would be beneficial to have Ms. Madonna sit in on a visit or two to work on the relationship issues.
Yes, he asked me to see them.
But you were treating him primarily for lying in the relationship.
Right, well,
That
that
was
was,
one of the
that
big
was what he
factors.
was concerned about, yeah.
Just to clarify, you said are your sessions generally an hour?
Yes.
So even when you met with Ms. Madonna and Mr. Perez, that group session would have been 1 hour?
Yes.
So out of all your observations that you've testified to today regarding Ms. Madonna, you spent a total of 2 hours with Ms. Madonna.
Correct.
Spent significantly more time with Mr. Perez.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
For,
No other questions.
all right, counsel, approach bench, please. Any objection with this witness being released from her subpoena?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. You may leave. Further evidence in the state? For the defendant.
Yes, Your Honor. We will call Joanna Madonna to stand at 25, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr. Sen.
Thank you, Dr. Zen.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please. Do you solemnly swear testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a seat.
Witness with you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Madonna.
Good morning.
You've been sitting and listening to the testimony for these past week and a half or so.
Yes, I have.
I guess the question of the trial is, Ms. Madonna, did you have to protect yourself from Jose that day?
Yes, I did.
Did you think Jose was going to kill you on that day?
Yes, I did.
Did you have to kill Jose in order to stop him from killing you?
Yes, I did.
Did you plan to kill Jose that day?
No, I didn't.
Did you think that asking Jose to leave was going to work out the way that it did?
No, I didn't.
Did you love Jose?
I did love Jose. I still love Jose.
Were you in love with Jose around this point in time when everything went down?
At this time, I was not in love with Jose. I had been in love with Jose at one point in the relationship, really early on, before all the lying and stuff started. But at this point, I was no longer in love with Jose.
All right. Your Honor, excuse me, Ms. Madonna, we're just going to start at the beginning and talk about everything. Where were you born?
My birth certificate says I was born in Yonkers, New York, and I was adopted right about a month old, and moved up to the Bronx, New York with my parents.
And you said you were adopted. Who were your birth parents?
I don't know who my birth parents were. I just know that my birth mother, her birthday was either April 4th or April 2nd, and mine was April 3rd. And I know they baptized me with the name Teresa. They baptized me Catholic, and then I don't know anything else about my birth parents.
Did you ever try to track them down or anything like that?
I did. I started looking after my mom died when I was 22, but I felt like that would have bothered her if I had done that while she was still alive.
All right. And who are your adoptive parents?
Joanna Madonna was my dad. He was born October 4th, 1925. He was born in Harlem, New York. Graduated from high school and became a bombardier navigator in World War II. Came out of the service and bought a gas station with my uncle. So he owned a gas station in New Rochelle, New York, which is up in Westchester. My mom was Anne Madonna. She was born in Italy. She came here when she was about 2 years old. She was born in 1926. So she went to school all the way through like middle school or high school. I think maybe first year in high school she dropped out. This was during the Depression, and she dropped out so she could help my grandparents. So that's my parents.
And I guess what year were you born?
I was born April 3rd, 1967.
And so you were later adopted in 1967?
Yep, my parents were alone for 15 years, so they got married in 1949, and they adopted my brother first. They adopted my brother in 1964, and then they adopted me in 1967. My brother, his birth parents were out in Ohio, so he and I are not biologically related.
What was your childhood like?
I loved my parents very much, but there was a lot of difficulties in the house because my dad was a heavy drinker. My dad drank every day, and I knew that from about the age of 5. My mother had given me the role of standing at the front door when he came home every day, and I was supposed to let her know whether I smelled alcohol on his breath or not, and I was 5. On the other hand, my father had bottles hidden underneath his front seat in the car, and he knew I knew that, and I wasn't supposed to tell my mother about the bottles. So I started out kind of being in the middle between them, and the drinking was a big deal. My mom did not approve of the drinking at all.
Did this cause stress in the household?
Oh yeah, my mother was, and she was a sweep everything under the rug kind of person where you just don't tell, you don't say anything, everything's, no, you don't let anybody see the dirty laundry, you don't let anybody know what's going on in the house. So there was a lot of stress. She was very close to her sisters and her brother, so we always had like relatives over on the weekends and stuff, but nobody knew what was going on in the house, so that was very stressful.
Did your parents talk a lot? Like, how did they handle their relationship and their relationship issues?
They didn't talk to me about their relationship issues. When he was drunk, he was fun, and he was very loving. But when she was mad at him, she would ignore him, and my mom could ignore somebody for days at a time. And that included myself, or, when I had done something to upset her, she could ignore me for several days at a time. So there wasn't a whole lot of healthy, I wouldn't say there was a whole lot of healthy relationship modeling happening for me when I was young.
Did your mother drink?
No, my mom never drank.
How was your relationship with your mother when you were in middle school and early on in high school?
I had a very strained relationship with my mom. My mom hadn't been able to have children, so I think that she had a lot of her own issues, and there was definitely no therapy or anything happening in their lives. And I was friendly, but I just think that as I started to develop and all that, things got real strained between my mom and I. And she had said a couple of really awful things when I was growing up. She told me, well, first she told me that my father never drank until they adopted me. Then she told me, if anybody ever finds out what you're really like, they're going to leave you. She said, I've never met anybody so ugly inside or out. And those things stuck with me and gave me some real self-esteem issues.
How was your relationship with your brother?
My brother is an introverted person. My brother's brilliant. He loves sports. He can tell you statistics from any sports events from probably 1950 through now. But there was no loving communication with me or my brother. We were very different people. He's brilliant.
And then how did your family life progress once you, well, back a little bit. Did you have any traumatic experiences early on in your life?
The most traumatic thing I remember is that when I was 5 years old, I was molested by my neighbor and her brother.
Talk to us more about that.
I don't remember a whole lot of details about it. I used to go over to, there were only a couple of houses around us where there were other children. I mean, they weren't really children. They were kind of teenagers. So I was little. I was like 5. And they had a lot of animals. And so I used to go over there and play with the animals and stuff in the yard. And this one particular afternoon, the brother and sister were upstairs, and they called me to come up. And I went upstairs, and they were engaging in a, what I now know is that they were performing oral sex on each other. And they involved me in that situation. And I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I didn't know anything at that point about body parts and all that stuff. And when they were done, they told me, you can't tell anybody.
Did you tell anybody?
I didn't tell anybody. The first time I told somebody about that, I was 21.
Why didn't you tell anybody?
Well, they told me not to tell anybody, first of all, and I was 5, so I listened to that. But I also felt ashamed. I felt like I had done something wrong. I didn't really know what it was, but I felt that I had done something wrong.
Did you know at that time what had happened was wrong?
I don't think, I mean, I knew there was something wrong. I mean, they told me not to tell anybody, so I knew that something was wrong. But I felt very ashamed of my body after that. Like, I felt very, very self-conscious after that. I became very aware of when people were looking at me and all that.
And you never told your mom or dad or anyone?
Never told anybody in my family about that until I was 21.
Had your mom at that point in time taught you about private parts and touching and bad touches and things like that?
No, we hadn't had that conversation yet.
Did you consider their reaction when you were thinking about telling them, if you remember?
I don't even think I considered telling them at all.
And you say you didn't tell anyone until you were 20 years old?
2021, somewhere in that area.
How was life in the household as you progressed to high school?
Well, my dad's drinking was getting worse, and I was starting to get rebellious. I started acting out. I started missing curfew. I started being belligerent with my parents, and I got myself a little part-time job right when I was 14 years old. I got my first job, and I found my own way to alcohol at that point, about 14, 15 years old, right around there. I started sneaking alcohol, and that was causing a lot of problems because I was hiding that from my parents.
So the first time you started drinking was when you were 14?
Around 14, yeah, I started sneaking drinks with my friends.
And how did your parents find out about it?
My father actually caught me, I think a friend of mine and I snuck off into like a bar. And I looked older. I was already like 5'10" by the time I was 15. I looked older and we snuck into this bar, and my father actually, a friend of his was in that bar. So, but I came home and told my dad, that I had gone to the movies or something, so Empire Strikes Back for the third time or something, and just so I could have a good cover story. And he said to me the next morning, he said, the state trooper was in that bar last night and he saw you drinking. And so at that point I had gotten caught, and that was bad.
What was his reaction? What happened because of that?
He kicked me out. He kicked me out of the house. And I had just turned 16, so this was actually like October 31st of that year, so I'm figuring that was 1983.
And so at 16, where were you living?
I left home, I packed a paper bag full of a couple of pair of clothes, and I went to White Plains, New York, which is where I had gotten another little job. There was a new mall there, and I was working at the mall and the little food court there and all the little Taco Bell and the little waffle thing there. And I asked the people that were working around there, does anybody have a couch I could stay on? And I started going from couch to couch, place to place.
And how was high school and everything going on affecting your mental health, if it was?
Well, when I left home, I dropped out of high school. There was no way I'd be able to get back and forth from getting back to school. There was no way I could do that. So I was not going to school at that point.
And did you always have a couch to sleep on?
Some nights I didn't have a couch to sleep on, and I ended up sleeping in the parking lot at the mall. There was a stairwell in the parking lot, so I would pull the cardboard box. I would just kind of flatten out a cardboard box. But I had been drinking usually, so I didn't really, it didn't really bother me.
Did you have any money at that point in time?
No. I mean, I had money to just kind of get by day to day, but
And did you have any savings?
no, I had no savings.
Did you have a car?
No, I didn't have a car.
And you said you weren't able to stay in school because you didn't have a ride or a way.
Yeah, there was no way I would have been able to get back and forth up to my school from there.
Were you doing harder drugs yet?
Well, it had started off with marijuana, and then, people were hanging out after work and stuff and drinking, and so it progressed to, there was some cocaine and there were some other, well, this is the 80s, there were a lot of there was like acid and just a variety of things. But I said, I never tried heroin, praise God, and had never stuck a needle in my arm. So that was my big, I was grateful for that.
How was life at this point for you at 16 years old, being out on the street?
It was horrible, and I coped with it by staying, drinking. I pretty much drank every day at that point, or I was either drunk or I was smoking marijuana. And I was hanging out with some people that were not very nice.
What do you mean, people that weren't very nice?
So sometimes I ended up with dangerous guys. In one particular instance, I was 16 and I didn't know this guy. I mean, I had seen him around. He was working at some of the other places in the mall and stuff. I had seen him around, and he offered me his couch. And when I got in there, I mean, I don't remember every detail of it, but at some point he had pulled me onto his lap and was forcing me to perform oral sex on him. And then he turned me around and sodomized me. And I got out of there, and I ended up sleeping in the park that night.
Did you call the cops?
Nope,
Did you call anyone?
I didn't call anyone.
Why not?
I blamed myself. I had been drinking, so I figured that that somehow made me culpable in that.
Were you ashamed of yourself?
Absolutely.
Did you ever call your parents or beg to come back home or anything like that at this point?
Oh, yeah, I had started asking to come home. Well, like I said, it was November, it was cold, and I was freezing, and I mean, there were just some times when I came to and I realized, where's my mom? Like I just wanted to, what am I doing? I was still like a kid, And so I started calling and asking them if I could come home. And, sorry, and they had told me that my brother had said that if I came home, he would never come home again. So they said, Joanna, you just need to stay out for a while, and maybe they'd come down and give me a little money here and there. So, but I wanted to go home.
And when you were raped at 16, were you a virgin at that point in time?
I was a virgin before I was raped, yes.
And how did that affect you?
Well, that pretty much messed me up sexually for a long time.
Did anything occur like that similar to you again while you're out on the street?
Yep, about 8 months later, it was summertime now, and I was with a similar type of group of people. We were walking down the Bronx River Parkway from White Plains up until going up to like Valhalla, where there's this big dam and there's like this little lake over there. And we were all walking, and we had been drinking, and I got caught behind, like I got left behind, and I probably had to use the bathroom. And I didn't realize there was a man there. And right there in broad daylight on the side of the Bronx River Parkway, he threw me down and raped me right there. He was behind me, and he had his hand around my throat from behind me. And I couldn't make any sound. And he raped me, and then he left, and I ended up walking and caught up with the rest of the people. And
Did you tell anyone about this?
no, I didn't tell anyone.
Did you say anything to the person that raped you?
No.
Why are you still hanging out with these kind of people after what had happened to you before?
These were the people that I was hanging out. I mean, this was just the group of people that I was with. I had nobody. I mean, I didn't have anywhere else to go.
Did you see this person again ever?
He came to my job at the mall the next day. I was working at Hickory Farms, and he showed up at my job the next day with tickets to a Yes concert. He wanted to take me to a concert. And I ran out the back door on my break and never went back to that job.
Have you ever given any thought about why you didn't call the police on these occasions, or why you didn't talk to anyone about that point in time?
I've done a lot of therapy here and there to deal with being a rape survivor. And my understanding is that it's not uncommon for somebody who's raped to blame themselves. And even about having been molested as a child, that's a very difficult thing for me to talk about. It's a very difficult thing for me to have lived with. But I think it's pretty common to feel some kind of shame and feel like, blame myself.
And how has that affected your opinion on strange men and men in general?
Yeah, I have, what happens to me is, and it'll just kind of happen at random intervals sometimes, and like I could be fine for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden, like there's an example. I was setting up at a meeting one night, and there was nobody else around at the church, and I was going in the kitchen to set up the coffee, and all of a sudden I heard footsteps around the corner, and so all of a sudden I panic, and I have my heart starts racing, and it doesn't matter if I even know that I'm safe or not. It's almost like an anxiety that comes over me, and then sometimes it'll just last a couple of days, and sometimes it takes a little longer to work through, but it can be very debilitating.
And talk a little, I'm trying to talk slow and.
I'm
make sure
sorry, am I
you're-
talking too fast? I'm sorry.
So you said you were working at Hickory Farms, and did you get enough, were you still out on the street at that point?
Yeah, I stayed out on the street until, actually the end of that summer, is when, I got a new job, and, the boss, asked me what I thought about going back to school.
Where was this job at?
It was at Blimpies on Main Street in White Plains.
And talk more about that boss and how you got resituated.
I was a cashier at the Blimpies, and Mark said, Joanna, you're a smart young lady, you know, you really should be back in school. And I said, okay. I mean, I think at this point I was done. I was done, you know. It had been hard. It had been kind of beating me up to be out there like that for a year and a half. And they offered me to use their apartment so I could establish residency in that town. And they helped me get the paperwork together. They talked to my mom and went back to my old school. And everybody at my old school helped get the paperwork together. And I was able to enroll in White Plains High School to finish my junior year.
And were you still drinking and using drugs at this point?
I was still drinking and using drugs. Yes, I was.
And how did your drinking and using drugs, how did that, did you think that's what caused you to be raped?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thought so at the time. Now I know that there's nothing that causes rape. I mean, rape is rape. But at the time, I figured if I hadn't been drinking and being in situations and places like that, you know, those things wouldn't happen.
Anything happened with your personal family life during your junior year?
Yes, at this point, I was calling my mom every morning before school. We had started talking every morning. And the day I was taking my finals at White Plains, I called my mom and she was slurring. And she said, I have my teeth out. But I knew that something was wrong. And I called my father at the gas station, and he rushed right home, and it turns out she had had a severe stroke.
And you said that's why she had a stroke while you were on the phone with her?
No. She had had a stroke in the morning. I just happened to call her right after the stroke.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you called, your dad wasn't home at that point in time?
No, my dad was working at the gas station. Dad had the gas station open 7 days a week. So Dad was at the gas station, and he left the station. He went home, picked up Mom, took her to the hospital, or called the ambulance or something, I'm not sure. But she ended up at St. Agnes Hospital in White Plains. And my dad and I started talking at that point about if I could move in to help him take care of my mother after her stroke. So they started smoothing everything over with my brother, and I made plans to be able to go back home.
Yeah. So how many months or years was it from the time and you're 16 and they kicked you out till when you were allowed to go back home?
It was almost 2 years. I went back home. I was 18 already when I went back home. I was supposed to graduate in 1985, but I went back home and started my senior year at Westlake in 85.
And was this the beginning of you re-engaging with your family?
Oh, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
What kind of things did you do? What did you have to do at that point?
Well, the fact that my mom was so debilitated now from the stroke, I mean, it just made our relationship really, I think, like, special, you know, just like we almost lost her. So we had a lot of, we had a lot of being able to forgive and stuff, and just kind of put all that teenage stuff behind, you know.
So this made your relationship better at that
Oh,
point?
yeah, absolutely. And I just kind of took over for her. So I started doing all the cooking and the cleaning and helping out, getting her around. She couldn't drive anymore, so I would drive her around.
And were you back in school at this point?
Yep. All the teachers and the administrators, they pulled all the strings and got me back in, so I was able to do my senior year, and I started applying for college. I applied to 2 colleges. I applied to Albany State University and Fordham University in the Bronx, and I got accepted to both of them. And if I got accepted to Albany, well, I mean, I got accepted to Albany, but if I went to Albany, I would have had to move up there. And I decided to go to Fordham so that I could commute and be able to stay home and take care of my mom, after school.
So even though you were out of the house for 2 years, how much behind your original class did you graduate?
I graduated in '86 instead of '85.
And did you stay on campus at Fordham?
No, I commuted back and forth.
And what were you doing? What were you doing in your college life?
So my parents, they were a little old-fashioned, and so the career that they had sort of tried to steer me towards was teaching. So I became a Spanish major, and I was working on a Bachelor's of Arts in Spanish Literature with a education major with that. And I was working after school. I was working at a newspaper. I was a telemarketing supervisor for the USA Today.
Did you have any relationships while you were in college?
Yep. Well, I was still drinking, and I was still drinking and smoking marijuana, and I had developed an eating disorder. And at the end of my first year of college, I met a nice young man, and we started dating, and we dated all the way through college. And at the same time is when I found my way into my first 12-step program, and I went to that for the eating disorder, and that saved my life at that point. And I found my way to Al-Anon, which is for the friends and families of alcoholics. My dad was still drinking, but not as much. He had stopped drinking considerably when my mom had her stroke.
And how did your drinking affect that relationship?
Well, for the couple of years that I was doing the 12 steps for my eating disorder, I was more dry. I was dry. I hadn't quit drinking. I wasn't looking at my drinking at the time. I was dry, so I wasn't drinking for a couple of years during the relationship. But I would start drinking again before the end of it.
And when you say that you were drinking and doing drugs, like how often, how many days a week were you drinking or doing
Yeah, not
drugs?
that often. I was more like a controlled drinker. So it's not that I didn't want to drink more, it's just that I controlled myself with it. But I was smoking weed, marijuana almost every day.
And I guess when you were drinking, were you drinking to get drunk? Like what were you doing? What was the point?
I drank to not feel anything.
Did you drink till you passed out or?
I used to black out. I don't remember passing out per se, but I was a blackout drinker. I'd be driving on the Bronx River Parkway coming back up, and I would come to as I was driving, and never had an accident or anything.
At this point, did you ever think that you needed help?
No. I thought that there was other things wrong with me. I was having a lot of like flashbacks with the rapes and stuff, but I didn't realize that the drinking and the drugs were contributing to my chaos in my life at that point.
How was your mom's health at this point in time while you were in college?
My mom ended up, January of 1989, my mom's sister died. She died of multiple sclerosis and lupus disease, and she was like my second mom. My Aunt Margaret died in January 89. My mom had a massive stroke in June of 89. Am I going too fast? I'm sorry. And my grandmother died in December of 89. So 1989, that was my junior year of college going into my senior year. And at that point, I started drinking again, heavily.
And talk to us about the rest of your college experience.
I went through the rest of my college experience kind of in a stupor, and I had just lost my mom. She was my mom, you know. We had a love-hate. She was my mom. But I managed to graduate from college, and I did my student teaching at the High School of Performing Arts in Manhattan, and I squeaked by, and I graduated with my teaching certification, and I found a full-time teaching position, teaching Spanish at a high school in the Bronx.
And how did losing your mother affect you and your father?
My father was the one that found her, and I can just tell you honestly that I just pretty much stayed numb for the next 2 years. I just stayed numb. I didn't want to feel that at all. I didn't grieve. I didn't want to feel any of that.
Did you graduate on time still?
I did. I graduated in 1990.
And once you graduated, what did you do from there?
Yeah, I was teaching at the school in the Bronx.
What were you teaching?
I taught Spanish full-time. I taught native speakers. I taught freshman Spanish. I taught the special ed classes the kids weren't, they thought maybe those students they didn't really need Spanish, but I did those classes anyway. I loved teaching those kids.
And you said you were teaching full-time?
I was teaching full-time.
Were you still living at your house?
Yeah, I didn't leave my dad. I never left my dad.
And how was your dad doing in regards to his alcohol and working at this point in time?
I didn't see my dad a lot. I mean, he was still working full-time. He was at that gas station 7 days a week. He opened that station at 4 o'clock in the morning. Papa left the house, and he didn't come home till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I would be out drinking in the afternoon, so I didn't really see much of my father at that time.
And how old are you at this point?
Say again?
How old are you?
So this is the end of 1991,
So how old are you?
24.
Are you familiar with the term of a person hitting their bottom?
Yep.
And explain that to us, that term.
Hitting a bottom is in recovery. We talk about that when you talk about you've gone as low as you need to go, gone as low as you need to sink. And so I hit my bottom in December of 91. I hit my bottom.
All right, explain hitting your bottom and your life experience around that point in time.
Up until that point, I was doing a lot of cocaine. And at that point, I met a gentleman who would, he taught me how to freebase cocaine. And I had never experienced anything like that. Crack was very popular and all, but I never did it. I never did that. But freebasing is just basically the same thing. It's just more pure form. And within 2 months of having had that first experience of doing that with him, I pretty much lost everything. I was hanging out with this guy. We met down in Manhattan. We met down outside of Washington Square Park, which is right outside NYU. And
how did you meet him?
I was down in the area looking for drugs.
And he just came up. How does that work for people that don't go around buying drugs? Like, how does that work?
He came up to the car. Okay. I slowed the car down, and he knew I was looking for something, and he approached the car.
How did he know you were looking for something?
I'm sure, I don't, everybody in that area, if you're slowing down in that certain area, that's a known drug area right there.
And they also saw you as a white woman slowing down in this area.
Yeah,
And you are teaching full-time at this point in time?
I was teaching full-time and freebasing at night, and I was a mess.
And you said a couple of times, for people that don't know, what exactly is freebasing cocaine?
They cook it up and it becomes like a rock, it's similar to crack, except that there's nothing added to it. So it's a very intense purified thing.
And this person that you met, did you go up to him going to purchase cocaine?
He came to the car. I never got out of the car.
Okay. I mean, were you going to get cocaine at that point in time?
Yes.
And what was the interaction like the first time that you met them?
He was great. He was cool. He was very cool. And we exchanged numbers, or he had his beeper or whatever. I got his number in case I needed drugs again. And so we talked a little bit.
And just to set the scene, this is back in 1991, so cell phones weren't around then. You said you got his beeper number.
Right.
Okay. And you got his number so you can contact him to continue to purchase drugs from him?
That's right.
And were you seeing him every day?
I saw him every day. We started hanging out a lot. I'd come down right after work, and we started hanging out, and things developed into a intimate relationship.
How did you start an intimate relationship with a drug dealer?
How did I start it?
Or I guess why did you start it is a better question.
That's who was in my world at that time. When you're drinking and getting high and stuff, that you tend to hang around other people that are doing the same thing. So he was the person I was seeing every day.
And is he the one that introduced you to freebasing, or were you doing it already?
No, he introduced me to it.
And how,
He's the only person I ever did it with.
and how was that?
The drug itself was, it was very intense. Never experienced anything like that. Completely lost myself.
And when you say you completely lost yourself, talk to us more about that. What does that mean?
I just went numb. It just numbed my whole body, and it was wonderful. It was like euphoria. Yep.
And this drug dealer, would you call it a romantic relationship with him?
My experience is that when you're that involved in drinking and using, you don't really have normal relationships. He was the only person I was hanging out with, and I definitely cared about him. I thought I was in love with him, but like I said, when you're drinking and using like that, you're not really having good relationships, but I definitely cared about him.
And how long was this relationship?
3 months.
And at this point in time, are you going to school and performing adequately and teaching these kids every day while you're doing this?
I was a mess. I came in late to work almost every day. I would come into work just as the bell was ringing. I could hear the bell for first class ringing as I wasn't even in the door yet. I was still in the parking lot. So my life was falling apart. I was always like 1 week shy of having my car taken. I wasn't taking care of any of my responsibilities. I wasn't helping my father anymore. I was just falling apart. I hated myself. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. Hated who I was.
And how did this what is the drug dealer that you were in this pseudo relationship? What's his name?
Sean Samuels.
And how did this relationship end?
The last time I was intimate with him, there was something wrong with him that night. Like, he just was not acting himself. I had never seen him acting like this. He was acting really angry and really just strange. And I told him I didn't want to have sex. And he proceeded to force me to have sex anyway. And I didn't see him again after that
So
in that capacity.
you say you didn't want to have sex with him, but
I didn't want to have sex with him.
So would you consider that a rape?
I consider that date rape. To me, it's different than the first two situations. This is because I knew Sean and I trusted him, and it was like that was more devastating.
And since that was more devastating, did you call the cops?
I did not call the cops.
Did you tell anyone?
I didn't tell anyone until a few months later.
And did you talk to Mr. Samuels about that?
We never talked about it. He did apologize, though. I mean, he was definitely trying to continue to have a relationship, but I couldn't.
And when this happened, where were you guys at?
We were staying with friends, and I was staying at my friend's house, and she was smoking, and so that's kind of what we did. We hung out after work and smoked, and
was the relationship over at this point?
the relationship was over at this point. We did see him again. 3 weeks later, we saw him again.
And where did you see him that next time?
A few people got together to go to a hotel and have like a little party at the hotel. And he showed up, and I showed up, and everybody was drinking and smoking, and I got sick. I started getting sick. I was just nauseous, and I couldn't, the smell of the smoke was making me sick. And I went to try to drink a beer, and that was making me sick. And that was a very frustrating night because like my body, like I wanted to drink, I wanted to smoke, and I couldn't. So that was a very frustrating experience.
And when you say frustrating, were you just mad that you couldn't drink and smoke?
Oh no, I needed to, my body was looking for it. I was addicted. My body was looking for it.
And after you had hit this bottom, what did you decide to do with yourself?
Yeah, so that night that happened, that was like January 16th or 17th. A few days later, my only friend who I was using with also, she asked me to take her to a 12-step meeting. She was ready to get clean. And she asked me if I would take her. And I said, I'll take you, but I'm not going in. And then I walked in, and I said, okay, I'll walk in, but I'm not going to say anything. And I ended up sitting down and saying my name and admitting that I was an alcoholic, and I sobbed for the whole meeting. And that was my first meeting, January 21st, 1992. And I haven't had a drink or a drug since then.
And so January 21st of 1992.
That's my date.
All right. How important is that date to you?
That means that's everything.
And you say you haven't had a drink or weed or
Nothing.
beer or alcohol?
Nope.
Nothing.
Even when I've had situations where I've been in the hospital, like I had a kidney infection at one point, and that was very painful, and they wanted to give me painkillers, and I said, I'm an alcoholic, you can't give me that, I don't want anything like that, and they said, well, you have to take something because your body, it's not going to be good for your body to be in that much pain. But I'm very serious about my sobriety. I won't mess with it.
Did anything else help towards your sobriety around that point in time?
Well, I got sober in January, and then towards the middle of February, I found out the reason I had been getting sick is because I was pregnant. And I didn't know that at the time, and I took a pregnancy test and became a mom like the minute I found out I was pregnant.
How did that affect you?
That was probably one of the best days of my life. And I never once thought I wasn't going to keep her. I had been raised by a woman that couldn't have kids, so I knew what a blessing it was to be able to get pregnant. And I knew who the father was. I knew it had to be Sean because I hadn't slept with anybody else. And Sean was from St. Vincent in the West Indies, and he was black. And I knew I was going to have a biracial child up in Westchester County, which was not very integrated at that time. And I knew I was looking at an uphill battle, but not once did I think of not having that baby.
You said having a biracial baby. I think things have progressed significantly since the 90s, but at that point in time, was this still a big deal?
It was a huge deal, and I didn't care.
Did you know any other white women that had biracial kids up there at that point in time?
None. We broke the mold.
And that daughter is Rachel, who we've seen and heard testify last week, I believe.
That's right.
And you said it was Sean Samuels, who was your drug dealer, who introduced you to freebasing. That's her dad?
That's her dad.
Does Rachel know all this?
Rachel knows all this, and she's sitting right there.
When did you tell her all this? When did you disclose all this?
I didn't tell Rachel this until she was old enough where I thought she could handle. I mean, I had told her little bits of it. I mean, obviously, she looked different from the rest of the family. So she knew at an early age she was different. But, you know, as she got older, I was able to fill in more of the details of the story.
And to your knowledge, has she ever met her dad?
She has not met her dad. She's spoken to him on the phone.
Did you talk to Sean Samuels at that point in time to let him know that he had gotten you pregnant?
Yeah, I had a sponsor, and she recommended that, you know, I go and talk to Sean and see if he wanted to be involved in Rachel's life. I didn't want to be with him, but give him the opportunity to be in Rachel's life. And I went down there, I found him in his usual spot down there near the park. And I explained to him that I was pregnant, and I asked him if he wanted to get sober and be in her life, and he said he was not going to get sober. He didn't have any interest in doing that. And so I felt it was safer to not have her be around.
And were you already committed to being sober at that point, even with that first AA meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, it's very unusual. Well, it's not very unusual. There's like statistics that say like only 1 out of every 35 people will be able to stay sober. So I consider myself to be very blessed that the desire to drink and use was removed from me that early on. I mean, I detoxed. That month was horrible. Going through the withdrawals was awful. I'm not going to lie, it was horrible. But, you know, I haven't picked up a drink since.
And how long has that been at this point for us not doing the math?
This past January was 23 years.
Okay. So about half your life?
About half my life.
And were you still teaching at this point?
I ended up herniating a disc in my back in March, and I went out on disability. And so I was not teaching at that point.
Did your drinking and drug use ever get you in trouble at work?
Oh, yeah. I was not responsible, and I tried to hide it from everybody. I didn't think anybody knew that I was drinking until after I got sober and found out everybody knew I was drinking.
So when you were drinking and using drugs, you were trying to put up a facade too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I didn't want anybody knowing that I was drinking.
Now talk about you going to AA and I guess your commitment to that at this point.
Well, I was pregnant, and I was single, and there were a lot of suggestions that were made in my first year of recovery. They say don't make any major changes in the first year. They say no relationships in the first year, and I didn't pay attention to those. I figured the suggestions didn't really apply to me because I was pregnant. So I started dating a guy on his first day out of rehab. He and I, well, we didn't start dating right away. He had a job and I wasn't working, and he needed a ride back and forth to his job. He was doing landscaping. And so we started hanging out. And typically when you're hanging out together like that, well, it developed.
And is getting involved with someone else in AA frowned upon from NAA?
Especially in the first year, it's definitely frowned upon. I think that it goes both ways because I think if you're in a relationship and you're both committed to sobriety, I think that you have a lot of understanding with one another. So I think that that could be positive. But in other ways, I think you end up focusing on each other's programs too much. So it just kind of depends on how healthy the individuals are, I think.
And we've heard a lot about AA. I don't know if we've had it broken that down yet, but how does AA work? How many meetings are you going to? How long are these meetings? Just kind of give us a feel for those of us who've never been in an AA meeting.
In the beginning, they say go to 90 meetings in 90 days because they figure that that's a good enough time to be able to figure out if you really have a problem or not. And it's just like, I don't know if you've ever seen any movies or anything of meetings, but you'll sit around and if it's a closed meeting, you identify yourself as an alcoholic. And the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. So anybody can go as long as they think they have a problem. You can go to a closed AA meeting. Open AA meetings are for anybody, and you go in and you tell your story, and you don't have to speak. Those are for anybody, friends and family, anybody that is interested in learning about alcoholism.
In closed meetings, do you have to speak?
No, you don't have to speak at a closed meeting. You could go your whole life in AA and never speak.
And when you said in movies and stuff that we see, it's kind of like when you say, hey, my name's Joanna and I'm an alcoholic, and everybody's like, hey, Joanna, and then you tell your story about what you had been through.
Exactly.
You said 90 meetings in 90 days. Do people really go to AA that much where they go into these meetings all the time?
What they say is if you drank every day, you go to a meeting every day. So, and I used to make excuses like, I'm really tired, I'm pregnant, I'm tired. And they would say, did you drink when you were tired? And, yep. Did you get hot? Did you drive down to the city to get your drugs even though it was cold out? Yep. So get yourself to a meeting. So.
Talk some more about John. And this is John Lopez, correct?
Yeah. John Lopez and I did not do anything the right way. We rushed right into a relationship. They call that, there's something called switching addictions, where you put down one thing and pick something else up. Like usually in the beginning, you put down drinking, you pick up chocolate, you pick up gambling, you pick up shopping, you just kind of switch addictions. And the relationship was that for me and for John, for both of us. So it was still a way for us to not really be dealing with, feeling and being sober for the first time. So, and there's only really two ways it can work out. Either you're going to stay sober or somebody's going to pick up. And John ended up picking up. He drank. John was a heroin addict. He snorted heroin. That was his thing. And
how were you able to still be with him if he was doing these drugs?
Well, he was hiding it in the beginning. So what he would do is I didn't know this, and I had friends that were trying to tell me, Joanna, something's not right with John. Have you seen how tiny his pupils are? And I was like, no. And he'd be scratching, and he would tell me it was the laundry detergent, things like that. I didn't believe it. He said he wasn't using, of course, you say you're not using. But he was snorting heroin in the bathroom at meetings. And then coming out and nodding during the meetings, nodding is when somebody's doing heroin and they sort of fall asleep right there. And, but I pretended that, I was in denial. Yeah.
What did he do for a living?
He just did a bunch of odd jobs.
You mean like cutting the grass, fixing a car?
Yeah.
Washing cars, things like that?
Yeah.
And how did you guys support yourselves?
I was still living with my father at this time, and John was living with his mother. And then he agreed to go to rehab. So I took him to a rehab. And when he came out of the rehab, everything was great. And he said, why don't we get married? He said, let's just get married. We'll have a wonderful, sober family. We'll raise this baby together. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. So we made plans to get married.
In hindsight, was that a great idea?
Not at all, no. I wanted to wait until after I had the baby because yes, I'm Catholic, and it's frowned upon to be pregnant and get married when you're Catholic. And I wanted to wait until after the baby was born, and John said, no, he said, that's my baby. He said, I want her to have my name.
And so does Rachel have his last name?
Rachel has John's last name.
Did you guys, so when did you guys get married?
We got married June 28th, 1992, which was the date I picked because that was three years to the date after my mom died. And within a week, he was snorting heroin again, and I brought him to rehab. So about 2 weeks after we were married, my honeymoon was driving John down to rehab in Pennsylvania.
And when you said it was 3 years to the date that your mom died, are dates in numerology or something you pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, they're important, yeah. I'm big on the anniversary stuff like that.
How long was he in rehab?
He stayed in rehab for a month, and he came out, and he was clean for the rest of the pregnancy. And Rachel was born 9/29/92. And he picked up a couple of weeks after that.
What do you mean he picked up a couple of weeks after that?
He started using again.
Go ahead. Right after he got out of rehab?
Right after Rach was born, so a couple of months later. So basically at this point, he's just having a few months of sobriety and then relapsing. He's becoming a chronic relapser.
After he got out of rehab, where did he go?
He came to my house. He moved in with me and my dad.
What did your dad say about that?
My father wanted a son-in-law so bad. My father wanted someone to give the gas station to. He wanted this to work out. He wanted me and John to work out. He was supportive of John in the beginning, but then as John's disease progressed, he started stealing money from the gas station, and Dad had to let him go.
So it was you, your dad, Mr. Lopez, John Lopez, and Rachel all living in this house at that time?
Right, in Thornwood.
Okay. And what did your dad think about you being pregnant?
My father was so excited to become a grandfather, he couldn't wait.
Did you think he was going to be that way when you first
No, I mean, I just not being married and telling my father I was pregnant, I was ready for him to kick me out. I had the speech all planned, Dad, just let me stay here until I can get some housing or something. And he said, I actually told him, I said, Dad, I have something to tell you, why don't you pour yourself a shot? And so he poured himself some vodka and sat down, and I told him that I was going to have a baby, and he said, that's my granddaughter. He said, you're going to stay here and have that baby. So he definitely surprised me.
Did he love Rachel?
He loved Rachel. That was his baby doll.
Where did you, I know you said you got married on June 20th of 1992. Where did you guys get married?
We got married in my backyard. Justice of the peace.
And you said John Lopez started working for your dad a little while after you got married?
Yeah, he was working for my dad for a little while, and then he started, my father couldn't keep him working at the gas station anymore. He eventually found himself a job at an aquarium place where they were selling fish tanks and stuff.
And was he ever able to get straight or clean for any period of time?
I think the longest period of time he was clean was like 6 months.
Okay. And what year was that in? Was it in 93?
Yeah, it was 93. And that was a great 6 months. Rachel was like this perfect baby. She never cried. Oh my God, she was perfect. I said, this is so easy. We could have 10 of these. And then, so we decided we were going to have another baby because that made sense at the time. And so we decided to have another baby, and then during that pregnancy, John picked up again. And Michelle was born January 17th, 1994.
Say that date again.
I'm sorry, January 17th, 1994. So Rachel was 15 months old when Michelle was born.
And that's Michelle Lopez.
Michelle Lopez.
And that is John Lopez's biological daughter.
Yep, biological daughter, yes.
And were you working at this point in time?
No, John was pretty traditional. He wanted, well, he was Puerto Rican, and he was traditional, like the man works and the lady stays home and takes care of the babies and stuff. But we were just floundering for money. He was everything that was coming in, he was using. So I actually started selling Avon just to try to do something to start generating a little more income.
And what so you have you, your dad, John Lopez, and then Rachel and Michelle.
Right. And the house had, it was 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And we eventually had like a half bathroom put downstairs, but it was a tight fit just with the 5 of us there.
And this is your childhood home that you grew up in?
Yeah, we moved there September of 1967, and I didn't leave there until 2007. So I lived in that house for 40 years.
For how many years?
40.
40 years. When was John's next relapse?
John was pretty much relapsing on and off the whole time, so I started going back to Al-Anon, and by the end of 1995, everything had gotten so bad with him that I felt like it wasn't safe for the kids. He had one episode where he became violent with me, and he was high at the time, and he picked me up against the wall. And he was a thin guy. He was a really thin guy, very tall, but really thin. And I couldn't believe that he was strong enough to do that. And that really scared me. And I asked him to leave at the end of 95.
Did you try therapy or anything like that before you had asked him to leave?
Yeah, we did a little bit of couples therapy. They had told him that he had major depression, and that's why he kept using, and if he tried some Prozac or something, it would help him, and he might not need to use. And he said that he was never going to take medication. So that was our therapy together.
And what did you go to therapy yourself as well?
Yeah, I had started having a lot of the PTSD flashback type of stuff, and I started feeling like kind of immobilized, and it was interfering with my life. And so I stayed with the therapy, even though John and I split up, I stayed in therapy.
And how was your PTSD affecting your life?
There were times when I couldn't go down certain streets by myself, like I couldn't walk in certain areas by myself, even to this day, like I kind of need to know my surroundings. When I've been teaching, if the hallway is deserted and all of a sudden I hear somebody, like if I hear footsteps behind me, my heart will start pounding, and I kind of have to put myself back where I can see who's coming.
And you mentioned Al-Anon a couple of times. What is Al-Anon?
Al-Anon's a 12-step program for the friends and family of alcoholics, and it helps you deal with, really what it does is help you put the focus back on yourself, and you stop worrying about what the other person's doing. And the big thing about Al-Anon is that, you can find peace and serenity regardless of whether or not the person stops drinking. A lot of people think that Al-Anon, they're going to tell you to just kick somebody out, but it doesn't work like that. They help you find some serenity whether or not there's chaos in the house.
And if you're already in AA, then why do you need Al-Anon?
Some people just have more issues with codependency, and I am one of them.
And when you're attending AA and things like that, do people typically or couples go to the same meeting?
No, that's pretty much frowned upon. They tell you you've got to have your own group. Well, they suggest, they don't say you have to do anything, but they suggest that you have separate groups. And then that's just so you can keep out of each other's sobriety. You know, you stay focused on your own sobriety that way. But you attend like an open meeting together, so.
And you said in 1995, before you asked him to leave, how was the relationship? How was the house at that point in time?
The relationship was horrible. We fought all the time. We argued all the time. And, yeah, we didn't have a relationship. And I was so focused on him and what he was doing, I felt like I wasn't completely there 100% for my children.
And when you said that you were fighting, how were you guys fighting?
We argued. It was all verbal. Okay. There was never any, I mean, except for that one incident with the, when he lifted me against the wall, there was no physical altercations.
Were you trying to avoid separating at that point?
Yeah, I saw my parents married together they got married in 1949 and she died in 89. they weren't ideal, you know. There was problems, but they loved each other, you know, and I remember before she died, I asked her, I said, Mom, do you still love Dad? And she said, I still love him. I'm still in love with him. And, you know, they had a really strong relationship.
Outside of their issues, is that something that you wanted for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So why did you finally ended up asking John Lopez to leave?
I had gotten a lot of support from the women in Al-Anon, and I knew that I could do it. I could be a single mom. I felt that I would be better by myself. I'd rather be alone than to be in a relationship that was chaotic.
So you asked him to leave, and he eventually just left?
He was a little frustrated. You know, he was a little upset. He didn't want to leave. He loved his girls. And, but he ended up leaving and went up to rehab up in Ellenville, New York.
And how old are your kids at this point?
Rach was 3 and Michelle was 1.5, almost 2.
And did you ever take the kids up to see them?
Every weekend. Okay. And he and I did, they had some family programs in the rehab, so him and I did the family stuff that they had. So we tried for a good few months working on the relationship up there, but it didn't work out. But I still brought the kids up. And then after he finished the program, he continued to work in the rehab. So he stayed up in the area up in Ellenville. So I used to drive an hour and a half on Friday and bring the girls up, and then I would come back on Sunday and pick them up.
And what did you start doing once you two got divorced? Where were you working?
Oh, I was working full-time. I started teaching full-time right after that. It was expensive because the daycare was really expensive. I don't know if anybody knows anything about Westchester, but everything's it's very expensive up there. So it was almost not worth it to work sometimes. And teaching is not it's not the highest paid profession. But so I was working part-time sometimes. I did what I could, you know, and but I've taught. That's all I did the whole time was teach.
And where did John Lopez end up going?
John stayed up in the area up in Ellenville and got in a relationship with a woman up there. They ended up having a baby. I don't remember the baby's name, but the lady's name was Deborah. And they ended up moving out to Arizona. And at this time, the girls would still talk to him. He would still call like once a month. He was sending child support. The last time I spoke to him on the phone, they were pretty down and out. He was very upset, and he asked me if I could send back the child support. And I said, John, listen, I said, you know, I'm here alone with the girls. You know, I can't just send the money back. And that was at the end of 2000. And then February of 2001, I got a phone call that he had committed suicide.
And do you know anything about the reasons behind or description behind the suicide?
It was over the relationship. From what I understand, the woman was leaving him, and he killed himself.
And that's what William Lopez, his brother, talked about. That's his brother that we're talking about, correct?
That's right.
William, excuse me, Billy
Billy.
Lopez, the father of William.
Right.
How did that affect your girls, his suicide?
It was devastating. They were 9 and 7. And even though he wasn't in their life on a daily basis, I mean, he was still there, you know? So it was, I have never had somebody like that kill themselves. So I got them into therapy right away.
Did you think it was strange or weird to put your kids in therapy?
Well, my feeling was that since, you know, we weren't really allowed to talk about anything when I was growing up, we were all, you know, we weren't encouraged to talk about our feelings. So I wanted to make sure that my kids had an opportunity to do that. So I kept them in therapy for a little while.
And you said that John Lopez left in 1995, correct?
John left in 95.
And the divorce was finalized when was the divorce finalized?
The divorce was finalized like in 99 maybe.
Okay. And was that just because you didn't file the paperwork, or what was going on with that?
I didn't have money for a divorce attorney.
But you guys eventually got divorced, and that was that.
Right.
And at this point in time that it was then just you, your dad, and the 2 girls, and you were single for how long after John Lopez left?
I was a single mom for 8 years.
So from 95 until 2003?
Right.
And how are you making ends meet? How are you making a living at that point in time then?
My dad had retired from the gas station, and he was helping with the girls in the afternoon and stuff. He'd put them on the bus in the morning and pick them up after school. So I was able to work full-time. I was able to teach full-time. I became a Weight Watchers leader part-time, and I was in grad school at night. And just for fun, I started singing. I started singing in a band and would have rehearsals at the house, and bring the girls when we would have a show somewhere. Rachel didn't like to come, but Michelle was there at every show.
Okay. So you're working full-time as a teacher?
Yeah, I was teaching full-time.
And you said you're also going to school for what?
I was working on my master's in education.
And how many credits away from did you ever get your master's in education?
I didn't finish my master's in education. No, I'm about 10 credits shy.
And so it's you being a single mom with your 2 kids and your dad in this house, and you're working.
Right.
Going to school.
Going to school.
And we talked a lot about your music. Is that the first time that you started singing or performing with a band or anything like that?
Yeah, and it was just, I mean, it was fun. It was my enjoyable thing to do. And I loved it. It was I was uncomfortable because I had developed a real stage fright, I think, from after the rape. And so I was uncomfortable, but I was working through that and able to stand up in front of people and sing, and yeah.
And how was we've talked a lot about Rachel and Michelle. How was Rachel's behavior at that point in time?
Rachel didn't have there were no real concerns at that point. Rach was kind of a tomboy. She was in sports. She was a really good athlete. Michelle was kind of prissy. They're very different. They look very different, obviously, because Rachel's biracial and Michelle is blonde-haired, green-eyed, Puerto Rican, Irish, Italian. Very different looking. But they were so close. They were like twins. That's how close they were. So Rachel wasn't having any real issues at that point.
And how was your father and his health at that point?
My father had been, I tell you, my father had never gone to a doctor since they adopted me. So since 1967, my dad never went to a doctor, and he ate a lot of salami, and he smoked cigars and pipes. And in 2003, my father ended up having a stroke, huge stroke. Ended up going into the hospital, had quadruple bypass, had a bovine valve put in, had his carotid arteries open up. Doctor told us he had a 25% chance of surviving and I should say goodbye. And I went in there and I looked at him and I said, I'll see you when you get up. And but that year pretty much changed everything in our life, almost losing my dad like that.
How did it change everything?
Well, well, first of all, it's my dad. That's my dad. But, I had really counted on him. I relied on him a lot, and we did everything together. He would shop and I would cook and, we did everything together. And and the girls were very close to him. And my grandmother had been up at our house every weekend when I was a kid. My dad would bring her up from the Bronx every weekend. So I felt like it was wonderful that they had a grandparent in the house. And my mom wasn't around, so they were very close to my father.
And your father would help out before of getting the kids ready and getting into school and things like that?
Yep.
And after this heart attack, he wasn't able to do that with the same
No,
efficacy?
he wasn't able to drive anymore after the stroke. He didn't trust himself to drive anymore. I mean, they said he could have, but he didn't trust himself to drive.
And were your kids, girls, still getting therapy and everything at that point?
They went back into therapy for a little bit, yeah. I'm not sure that either one of them really liked therapy, so I didn't force them to keep doing it. And the therapist assured me that they were both okay, and that's all I needed, so.
And were you okay being alone as a single mom with those two girls at that point in time?
I had my dad, yeah. I felt, it was fine, yeah, I was happy. I got a little car, I was happy. It was fine. We were a family. It was us.
All right. And we've heard Charles Pritchard testify. When did you meet Chuck? And I'll call him Chuck. When did you meet Chuck?
I met Chuck in 2003, a few months after my dad's surgery. And I walked into a diner up in Taconic, New York. And he was there and he approached me and we exchanged numbers.
Okay. And how did things progress from there?
We started talking on the phone because he was an hour and a half away, so we started talking on the phone. We had these great phone conversations, and I found out he was a single dad, and he was totally committed to his kids. He seemed like a great guy. And so we got together on 2 occasions, and both occasions, I had told him that I was in recovery, and he said that he drank on occasion. But it turned out that he drank like every weekend and he smoked marijuana every day. And I found that out when we went to a function and he just drank and drank. And I said to him the next day on the phone, I said, listen, I'm sober like 13 years. I can't be with somebody that drinks like this. And he said, he thought about it for a couple of days and he called me back and he said, I'm going to go to a meeting. He said, I want to see you. I'm going to go to a meeting. I'm going to stop drinking. So he stopped drinking, and things just progressed from there.
And what were you doing up in that part of New York? What were you doing at that diner that day?
I had been visiting my best friend Liz and her family.
So it was just a random chance encounter?
Yeah, it was a random encounter, and it was on a Monday, and he didn't usually work on Mondays, so we figured that was divinely inspired. God put us in each other's lives. That's what we figured.
And you said he lived about an hour and a half away?
Yep.
And how did the relationship progress from there?
It was hard because he lived so far away, so we basically saw each other on weekends. He'd come down with his kids. I'd go up there with my kids, and it seemed like everything was great. and we fell in love.
And how many kids did Chuck have?
Chuck had 2 children by a previous relationship. They were not too much far apart from my kids.
And how was that trying to blend those families together?
Well, he ended up eventually coming down. He ended up coming and just staying down there with us. He moved into the house with my family. He came down. He brought his daughter down with him, and so there. All of a sudden, it wasn't just me and him. Me and him alone was fine, but all of a sudden, all the kids and everything was there was a lot of tension.
And you said that where was he living but when you met him initially?
Well, when I met him, he was living up in Hudson, New York.
All right. Did he have an apartment or a house, or what was going on, if you can recall?
He had a little modular place.
Okay. And then why did he move down to where you were?
Well, it was my dad's house, and we lived with my dad, so I wasn't going to leave my father.
And he lived in the family home that you had been in since you were born.
Right. He came and moved right into and we made room for his daughter. We doubled up a couple of the girls, and
was he able to find a job down there?
the first year I had a good job teaching up in Katona Middle School and High School. And my father was scheduled to get double knee replacement, and Chuck's a big guy, and he said, well, I'll take care of your father. So I taught full-time, and he took care of my dad after that surgery, and he made sure the kids were getting back and forth to school and stuff.
So he chipped in at the house, but he wasn't necessarily working anywhere. You were?
Yeah, he wasn't working. I was working full-time.
Okay. And you said you brought his daughter down there with him as well, correct?
Yeah, we got her enrolled in the high school. She enrolled as a senior there. It was very hard for her because it was a very different area. She was more used to like a city, a little bit more city than where we were.
And how old were your kids at this point?
Rachel was 11, Michelle was 10.
And were there any problems between Chuck and the kids?
Yes. Well, I had been alone for 8 years with the girls, so I think that it was hard for them to all of a sudden be sharing me. And Rachel didn't. I mean, at first they were really excited, but then once Chuck was actually there, Rachel turned her back on Chuck and wouldn't accept him and wouldn't take rides from him, wouldn't take anything from him. So we had to take separate cars on occasion to do things. So that was brutal for us.
Did you try to get her to talk to a counselor or a therapist or have some family counseling about this issue?
Yes, and she was very resistant.
Okay. Was this out of the, I guess, above and beyond any normal, hey, you're not my real dad type of stuff?
Yeah, this was above and beyond.
What would she do?
Well, like I said, just she would ignore him in the house, which is, I mean, and Chuck's a nice guy, you know, Chuck is a nice guy, and he really went out of his way to be there for the girls, and she was just ignoring him and very disrespectful, just wouldn't even acknowledge him in the room.
And you tried to work her through that and get them to have a decent relationship?
I did, and it put me in the middle. I was constantly like ping pong ball. I was just in the middle all the time.
And while you guys were dating, you didn't have this issue. It wasn't until he moved in with his daughter that this became a problem.
Right.
Were you guys married at this point in time?
No, we hadn't gotten married yet. We got married June 26th, 2004.
And who asked who?
He asked me.
Okay. And why'd you say yes?
Oh, I loved him. I still love Chuck.
Did you, and did you think this was going to be a relationship that was going to last?
Oh, yeah,
Brand
this
your-
was forever.
And did you have your own insurance at this point?
I had my own insurance, and I put him and his daughter on my insurance.
And once you got married to Chuck, what happened from there?
We decided that probably the best thing to blend the two families would be for us to have another child. So we decided that we were going to have a baby. And I was advanced maternal age, they call it. I was like 30, so it was, yeah, I was 38 at that point. And so we got pregnant with Isabel. And I was not working full-time at this point. I was working part-time. I was still working for Weight Watchers. And I had started working at a church. I was an administrator for a Unitarian church up in Croton, New York.
And you said that was you and Chuck's decision to have a kid?
Yes, absolutely.
And how old is Chuck at that time, do you know?
If I was 38, Chuck's 6 years older than me, so he was 44.
And was that like a joint decision, or was it your decision, or?
Oh, no,
was
we
it-
decided together.
And you thought at that point in time that it'd be a good idea just to, hey, we can have a united kid together?
Yes, a united child.
And that may not be the proper way to phrase that, but you understand what I'm saying.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our morning recess at this point. During this time, it is your duty not to talk among yourselves about this case. It's your duty not to talk to the parties, the witnesses, the lawyers about anything at all. It's further duty not to talk to anyone else, to allow anyone else to talk with you, to say anything in your presence about this case. If anyone communicates with you in any way, you need to let the sheriff know about it when you come in. Don't do any individual research or investigation on your own about any issues touching on this trial. Stay away from your smartphones. Avoid reading, watching, listening to accounts of this trial. And do not form or express an opinion about this case during this time. With that, while everyone else is going to remain seated, I'm going to excuse the 13 of you and ask that you return and assemble in the jury room at 15 minutes to the hour of 12. If that's your excuse. Rachel Fletcher is asked from the courtroom. I tell you, I will mark this as juror exhibit number 10, and we'll have the clerk make a copy of this for you, and you can have it before they come back in. Anything further, rec for the state?
No, Your Honor.
Anything for the defendant? We're in recess at 20.